welcome back to another episode of Handloader TV. I'm your host, Jeremiah. And in this week's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the FN509 Tactical and the cartridge it's chambered in, the 9mm Luger. This cartridge has a very rich history, and if we want to start at the beginning, we got to jump all the way back to 1902 with firearms designer George Luger, who was working for the DWM company in Germany. He set out to develop a new cartridge for his Luger semi-automatic pistol, and what he came up with was a 9mm Luger we all know and love today and can't find ammo on the shelves for. But that's why we handload, right? 9mm Luger has many different designations that it's known by, such as 9x19, 9mm NATO, which generally refers to the 9mm Luger plus P loading for the NATO militaries, and we also have 9mm Parabellum, which again jumps us back to the DWM company when they patented the name Parabellum, which is coined from the Latin phrase si vis pacem parabellum, which means if you want peace, prepare for war. That was a great marketing strategy on their part, and that phrase has lasted throughout the ages. As I'm sure you're aware of, 9mm Luger is a very popular cartridge. It's been used by militaries around the world for decades, and our own U.S. military recently adopted it as its official sidearm cartridge. So we have a ton of 9mm handgun offerings on the market today. Different shapes, different sizes, different configurations. But today we're going to be looking in depth at this FN509 Tactical. Let's go ahead and take a closer look at the firearm. We purchased this pistol from Cabela's, and I believe it is a distributor exclusive, as included with the pistol was this Vortex Venom 6MOA red dot sight, which is very nice. And I think the major appeal of this firearm here is the sheer number of features they've packed into it. So let's go ahead and break it down. Starting at the back here, we have replaceable back straps to fit any sized hand, which is very nice. Our pistol came with two, the one installed here and the one here. Also, we have texturing on all four sides of the grip, which is very nice if your hands are sweaty. It really does help you get a better grip on the firearm. We have ambidextrous magazine release. We have an ambidextrous slide catch or slide stop here. And we have front and rear cocking serrations. We have suppressor height, Trijicon 3-dot night sights to co-witness with our Vortex Venom, which I like. And we have a 4.5-inch barrel here, which is threaded to accept a suppressor. And this thread protector here is held in place with an O-ring, which is a very nice feature, and I like that a lot, so you don't lose it while you're shooting a large amount of rounds downrange. We have a 1913 Picatinny rail here to accept lights, lasers, or whatever other accessories you would like to install on the firearm. And we have a trigger. Now, one thing I want to point out about this trigger is it can be kind of confusing, because if you go on to FN's website, they claim it is a double action trigger. But let me show you, and we are clear here, the firearm is empty. Checked it multiple times. This trigger, when I go to pull it, it's not what I think of with double action, because that's it. I can't pull the trigger again. I have to recock it and reset the striker in order to pull the trigger again. So if I have a failure to fire, I can't simply squeeze the trigger again and double tap that primer to see if it will go off. The reason why FN claims this is a double action operation pistol here is because the system they use internally for the trigger mechanism is a partially pre-cocked double action only striker system, whereby pulling the trigger first completes the process of cocking the striker, disengaging the striker block, which we'll show you here in a minute, and from there, once the striker block is released, the striker can impact the primer and the cartridge and fire the handgun. So with that said, let's talk a little bit about the trigger and then we'll disassemble this. The trigger feels a lot like a double action trigger, and I don't mean that in a good way. There is a lot of creep and there is a very gritty feeling to pulling this trigger. We'll see if you can kind of see that on camera. It is very gritty, a lot of take up, a lot of creep. On an average of 5 pulls on a Wheeler Engineering trigger pull gauge, the trigger broke at 6 pounds, 10 ounces, which I wouldn't mind too terribly much if it was really crisp and clean feeling, but it's not. And in dry firing this handgun, I find it very difficult to keep my sights on target. And once that striker is released, even if my trigger press is flawless, I can still see those sights move just a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see how this firearm performs on range. Lastly, this is one of the few pistols on the market that offer factory fitting for red dots and optics mounting. It features FN's low profile optics mounting system, and it comes with a bunch of different plates for use with different red dot sights, and you even have this plate here to protect your night sights, which is pretty neat. So it field strips just like your standard striker fired handguns. We're going to lock the slide back, flip it over, release our takedown lever here, remove the magazine, which I probably should have done first, 17 round magazine, and we can drop our slide, and then we release the striker by pulling the trigger, which releases our slide from our frame here. Pretty typical recoil spring, barrels there. This little guy right here, where my finger is where the striker block is located. And that is what is disengaged as you pull the trigger. And that's partially why the trigger is a little bit creepy. So looking at the frame here, it's a pretty typical striker fired frame. The slide runs on these 4 rails here and here. We have our ambidextrous slide catch here, and we have 2 exposed trigger bars running to the rear. And you can see those down in there, hopefully. Then this pistol features a ton of built-in safeties. We have a drop safety built into here, we have a firing pin block on the slide, and we have a drop safety mechanism here, which prevents the sear from moving down out of engagement with the striker unless the trigger is pulled, in addition to this trigger safety here. So they put a lot of thought into safety with this firearm, which is, I can appreciate that. You don't want to drop it and have it go off. Maybe a little bit overkill, maybe a little bit redundant, but it's nice to have it. So the slide simply slides back onto the frame, lock it to the rear, return your takedown lever, drop the slide, and you're good to go. Also included with this pistol were 2 24-round magazines, which are about the same length as the pistol roughly, which is nice because you can carry these on your offhand side, have your pistol on your right side, and it's just like carrying another FN 509 on that side. Also included with this was some tools to adjust your red dot sight, and the really neat thing is this lightweight recoil spring assembly they've included with the handgun for use with a suppressor. So we're going to use this titanium Abraxas suppressor, which is designed to be used without a Nielsen device or any kind of booster system, and we'll see if we can get function with light loads and the light recoil spring, because generally this suppressor won't work with light loads. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump over to the hand loading side of things. When it comes to hand loading the 9mm, it's a fairly simple process. So to avoid being redundant, I'm not going to walk you through each of the steps, but rather I'm just going to tell you what we did to develop these loads for this video. If you don't know how to hand load, don't worry, we're going to be doing an in-depth video on how to hand load in the near future. So keep your eye out for that. For this, we selected RCBS dies. I've had this die set forever, but it's still going strong and working very well. For all of our brass needs, we've selected Starline brass. They make exceptionally high quality cases at a very reasonable price. And we'll be using CCI 500 primers throughout all of our testing. And as you can see before us, we have a ton of different bullets, different powders. We're going to mix and match and try a bunch of different loads. I've loaded up over 200 rounds of ammunition, and I think there's either 40 or something like that different loads that we're going to test through this firearm. We're going to take those best loads and show them to you guys in this video. If you want to see how all the loads perform, the good, the bad, and the ugly, I would encourage you guys to check out loaddata.com, one of our websites, and in the search bar type in 9mm Luger loads, or 9mm Luger, and look for the Handloader TV loads. And you'll be able to see what powder we used, what velocity we got, and the group size free of charge. The only thing you won't be able to see is the powder charge weight, which we reserve for subscribers. Now, should you decide to subscribe, it's a great way to support the channel and what we're doing here. And in addition to that, you'll have access to the world's largest online reloading manual with over 300,000 loads. With that, we used a Redding 10x powder measure here to dispense all of our charges, and I weighed each charge on an RCBS Matchmaster scale to ensure that accuracy was within 0.04 of a grain. For our seating operation, I used the standard RCBS seating die, but for the crimping, I went ahead and opted to use a Lee factory crimp die. Personally, I've had good results with these dies, and I'm a big fan of them. Also, a quick side note on seating depth. It's an often overlooked item when it comes to loading 9mm, but you generally have a fairly narrow window, depending on your bullet selection, for overall length to ensure proper function in your firearm. And in addition to that, seating a bullet by just, say, 40 thousandths of an inch, which isn't very much, can increase pressures by up to 15,000 psi. So as always, use a reputable data source and make sure that your overall lengths are perfect. With that said, let's take this handgun and let's go hit the range. So we're out on the range now at the bench. We've got our Ailer Model 35P chronograph set up 10 feet from the muzzle to record all of our velocities. And as usual, the target is downrange at 15 yards. And according to my Kestrel 5700 here, it's a beautiful 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity is 10.9%. And pressure is 25.18. For our first load, we thought we'd try something a little bit different, a little bit interesting. I'm using powder pistol powder, a 4.7 grain charge with 147 grain Lyman cast bullet that I cast myself and powder coated myself with Eastwood green powder coat. I like these because they're suppressor safe, so figured we'd show them to you guys. Starline cases, CCI 500 primers, and an overall loaded length of 1.100 inches. So with that said, let's put them on a paper and we'll see how they do. Oh, one more thing to note too, I also did swap the spring in this gun since we're running the suppressor and these are fairly light loads. I swapped the spring from the standard spring to the suppressor spring that is included with this gun. So hopefully we'll have 100% functionality. Here we go. For this next load, we're using a moderate charge of CFE pistol at 4 grains and a 147 grain Barry's plated round nose bullet, CCI 500 primers, Starline cases, and an overall loaded length of 1.100 inches. And as usual, we'll shoot them and group them. Moving along with our load development here, we're using Shooter's World powder, a 6.9 grain charge this time, with 124 grain Spear Gold Dot hollow point. Same CCI 500 primers, same Starline cases, and our overall loaded length is 1.100 inches. Let's see what kind of group we can get out of it. For this next load, I expect to see some good results. We're using Vitavori N340 powder, a 5.7 grain charge with 115 grain Hornady XTP bullet, Starline cases, CCI 500 primers, and an overall loaded length of 1.142 inches. Now, let's see how they group. The next load we're going to try is Alliant Bullseye powder, a 4.5 grain charge with 115 grain Spear Gold Dot hollow point. Same Starline cases, same CCI 500 primers, and our overall loaded length is 1.10 inches. This time around, we're going to be using True Blue powder, a 5 grain charge with 124 grain Hornady XTP. Same CCI 500 primers, same Starline cases, and an overall loaded length of 1.120 inches. Let's put them on a paper, because a paper doesn't lie. So we are back at the bench now after putting about 400 rounds through this firearm, and before we dive into our target results, there's a few things I want to point out real quick. For all loads using the 147 grain bullets, we did shoot those suppressed with this particular suppressor here. This is an AWC Systems type titanium Abraxas suppressor, and it's designed to function without a Nielsen device or a booster, as previously mentioned. However, there is some inherent challenges to using a suppressor like this, and I think it's worthy to point out. When we are developing loads, we start at usually minimum and work our way up to maximum. And we did not get 100% functionality with this with the lighter loads. Now, if we used a little stouter powder charge or a faster burning powder, we were able to get 100% functionality with the firearm. And for all of those loads that we shot suppressed, we did swap out the standard recoil spring assembly for the lighter one to aid in that functionality. But unfortunately, we didn't hit that 100% mark. So with that said, I want to go ahead and dive into our targets here and take a look at the first target. We used Power Pistol powder, a 4.7 grain charge, and this bullet is this little green bullet that you see sitting up here. I cast these myself. These are from a Lyman mold. The mold number is 356637. It's a 147 grain bullet that I powder coated with Eastwood green powder coat, and I've been working up loads for these for a long time because they're a great plinking bullet. We get a really good standard deviation of 8 and a group size of 1.77 inches. If you remove that high flyer, it drops down to 0.80 inches. But I'm going to be honest with you guys, I don't think any of the flyers here are on me. I think they're on the gun. It's kind of inherent to what this gun was doing throughout our testing. So, moving along to our next target here, we used CFE pistol, a 4.0 grain charge, and what an awesome powder this CFE pistol is. We had low standard deviation and low extreme spread numbers across our entire charge weight spectrum, and this particular load grouped into a 2.12 inch group. Again, if you remove the flyer, it measures out to 0.94 inches. So not too bad. I'm pretty happy with the results here. Our next load, we used Shooter's World Major Pistol Powder, another fantastic powder with a low extreme spread and standard deviation of 12, and a group size of 1.39 inches. Very pleased with that for this particular firearm. As you're going to see as we go through these targets, the group size is a little bit bigger than what I would like, but this is how the firearm performed. Moving along, Vitavori N340 powder, a 5.7 grain charge, and as you can see we had a lot of horizontal stringing with this particular powder, and it grouped into a 1.6 inch group. But what an outstanding standard deviation of 2 and extreme spread of 6. Next load, Alliant Bullseye powder, 4.5 grain charge, 1.5 inch group roughly, a standard deviation of 9, and an extreme spread of 19. I really like those Spear Gold Dot bullets. They expand really well, they penetrate well. That would be a pretty decent self-defense load if you're looking for something with a little bit higher velocity. Moving right along to the final load we tried, we used True Blue powder, a 5 grain charge, with a standard deviation of 4 and an extreme spread of 12, some outstanding numbers on that load, and a group size of 1.10 inches. So all in all, you can kind of see how the firearm performed with the best loads here, and these are the groups we got. So now you guys have seen for yourself how this firearm performed, the accuracy we got, the functionality. You've seen it all for yourself, and you guys can make an educated decision whether this firearm is right for you or not. Now, personally, for me, this is just me talking here, I have two big complaints with this particular firearm. Number one is the fact that we didn't get quite as good of accuracy as I'd hoped. While some of our loads were right around the 1 inch mark, I would have liked to see that a little bit tighter, a little bit smaller group size there. But all in all, not too bad accuracy-wise. My second big complaint with this firearm is the trigger. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, it feels atrocious to me. I'm not a big fan of this trigger. And I think as soon as we're done here, I'm going to give our gunsmith a call and see if we can get a trigger job done on this guy. But all in all, the firearm did function 100% without the suppressor, and with the suppressor and stouter loads, we were able to get good function with that as well. And that's just inherent to the suppressor. So with all that said, we hope you learned something, and if you liked what you saw, we hope you'll give us a thumbs up and let us know that you liked this video. Also, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you're notified when we post our next video. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, personal experience with this firearm, be sure to leave them in the comments below. We do our best to read and respond to every one of those. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next episode.